The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington Cemetery as Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress blues one final time. 23 years of military service had taught him precision in everything, but today his hands trembled as he straightened his medals. Today was different. Today he would bury his wife. Sarah had been his anchor through 3 deployments in Afghanistan, countless sleepless nights when the memories came flooding back, and the slow, painful transition to civilian life. She understood the nightmares without asking questions, held him when the fireworks on the 4th of July sent him diving for cover, and never once complained when he checked the locks on their doors 3 times every night. The funeral director, a thin man with kind eyes, approached Marcus in the preparation room. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know we'll take excellent care of everything today. The honor guard is ready, and we've coordinated with the police department for traffic control." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Sarah had planned everything herself during her final weeks, knowing he would be too broken to handle the details. She had even chosen her favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, the same song that played when they first danced at their wedding 15 years ago. The cemetery was already filling with people when Marcus arrived. Sarah's co-workers from the elementary school where she taught, neighbors from their quiet suburban street, his old Army buddies who had driven from 3 states away. Everyone loved Sarah. She had this way of making people feel seen, whether they were 6-year-old students struggling with reading or grown men carrying invisible wounds from war. Marcus took his place in the front row, staring at the flag-draped casket. The American flag wasn't for Sarah, but for him, a final honor from a grateful nation for his service. Sarah would have laughed at that, he thought. She always said the real heroes were the families who waited at home, not the soldiers who left. His brother, David, slid into the seat beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "She's watching over you, Mark. You know that, right?" Marcus couldn't respond. The grief sat in his chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. The chaplain began speaking about love and sacrifice, about Sarah's dedication to her students, and her unwavering support for her husband. The words floated around Marcus like background noise. All he could think about was coming home to an empty house, sleeping in a bed that would forever feel too big. When the honor guard began the flag-folding ceremony, something inside Marcus finally cracked. The precise movements, the crisp uniforms, the solemn dignity. It reminded him of too many other funerals, too many friends who didn't make it home. But this time, it wasn't a fallen soldier. This time, it was the woman who had saved him from his own demons. The lead soldier approached with a folded flag, kneeling before Marcus with practiced grace. "On behalf of the President of the United States and the United States Army, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your honorable and faithful service." Marcus accepted the flag with hands that had stopped shaking. For a moment, the weight of it grounded him, connected him to something larger than his grief. Sarah had understood this part of him too, the part that found comfort in tradition and ceremony, in the brotherhood forged through shared sacrifice. As the final notes of taps echoed across the cemetery, Marcus felt a strange mix of gratitude and terror. Grateful for the love he had known, terrified of the emptiness that stretched ahead. Sarah had been more than his wife. She had been his purpose, his reason for getting up each morning, his proof that life could be beautiful despite the darkness he had seen. The cemetery workers waited respectfully as mourners began to file past, offering condolences and sharing brief memories of Sarah. Marcus shook hands and accepted hugs, his responses automatic and polite. But inside he was planning how to honor Sarah's memory, how to channel his grief into something meaningful. He didn't know yet that his good intentions would lead him down a path that would test everything he thought he knew about justice, about the system he had served so faithfully, and about how quickly a grieving man could become an enemy in the eyes of those sworn to protect and serve. The first mistake hadn't happened yet, but the stage was set. A veteran carrying too much pain, a system unprepared to handle what he was about to become, and a series of misunderstandings that would spiral far beyond anyone's control. As the last mourner departed, and the cemetery returned to its eternal quiet. Marcus remained beside Sarah's grave. He whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep, made vows that would soon be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. The sun was setting, casting everything in golden light, and for a moment, he could almost feel Sarah's presence, her gentle touch on his shoulder. Tomorrow would bring the real test. Tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to live without the only person who truly understood him. Tomorrow, the healing would have to begin. But tonight, he would stay with Sarah one last time, watching over her as she had watched over him for 15 precious years. 3 weeks after the funeral, Marcus Thompson sat in his kitchen staring at a stack of medical bills that seemed to grow taller each day. Sarah's cancer treatment had been aggressive and expensive, draining their savings and pushing them deep into debt. The insurance company kept finding reasons to deny claims, citing pre-existing conditions and experimental treatments that Sarah's desperate doctors had recommended. The house felt hollow, without Sarah's laughter echoing through the rooms. Her coffee cup still sat in the sink, unwashed, because Marcus couldn't bear to clean away the last traces of her presence. He had taken extended leave from his job at the Veterans Affairs office, unable to focus on helping other veterans when he could barely help himself. His phone rang constantly, collection agencies, insurance adjusters, funeral home administrators asking about final payments. Each conversation was a reminder of how unprepared he had been for Sarah's death, how naively he had believed that his military service and steady employment would be enough to protect his family from financial ruin. Marcus pulled out his laptop and began documenting everything. Sarah had always been the organized one, keeping meticulous records of every medical appointment, every treatment, every conversation with insurance representatives. Now he had to piece together her system, trying to understand where they had gone wrong, where the coverage had failed. The more he dug into the paperwork, the angrier he became. Claims that should have been routine were being denied. Treatments that Sarah's oncologist had deemed necessary were being labeled as experimental. The insurance company seemed to be betting that grieving families would simply give up rather than fight the denials. His brother David found him there at midnight, surrounded by papers and empty beer bottles, typing furiously on his laptop. "Mark, you need to get some sleep. This can wait until morning." "No, it can't," Marcus replied without looking up. "They're counting on me to give up. They're counting on me being too broken to fight back. But they don't know who they're dealing with." David sat down across from him, concerned by the intensity in his brother's voice. "What are you doing exactly?" Marcus turned the laptop screen toward him. "I'm building a case. Every denied claim, every rejected treatment, every time they made Sarah jump through hoops while she was dying. I'm documenting everything. For what? For justice. For other families who are going through what we went through. For Sarah." Marcus's voice cracked on his wife's name, but his resolve remained firm. "She died fighting this disease, and I'll be damned if I let them profit from her suffering." Over the next month, Marcus threw himself into research with military precision. He contacted other families who had dealt with the same insurance company, reached out to medical advocacy groups, and began building a network of people who shared similar stories of denied claims and financial devastation. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The pattern was deliberate and systematic. The insurance company had algorithms designed to automatically deny certain types of claims, knowing that a percentage of families would never appeal. They had quotas for denials, bonuses for adjusters who saved the company money, and legal teams dedicated to wearing down families until they gave up. Marcus started a blog documenting his findings. He called it Sarah's Fight, and it quickly gained attention from other families dealing with similar situations. He shared denied claim letters, recorded phone conversations with insurance representatives, and provided step-by-step guides for appealing denials. The blog's popularity surprised him. Within 2 months, he was receiving hundreds of emails from families across the country. Parents who had lost children to cancer, elderly people whose life-saving medications were being denied, veterans whose service-related injuries were being dismissed as pre-existing conditions. Each story fueled his determination. Marcus began organizing online support groups, connecting families with patient advocates, and sharing resources for fighting insurance denials. He worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and grief-driven adrenaline. His supervisor at the VA called repeatedly, asking when he planned to return to work. Marcus kept postponing, claiming he needed more time to grieve. The truth was, he couldn't imagine going back to pushing papers when he had found his true mission. 6 months after Sarah's death, Marcus received a call from a law firm specializing in insurance fraud cases. They had been following his blog and wanted to meet. The lawyer, Jennifer Chun, was a sharp woman in her 40s who had built her career fighting corporate malfeasance. "What you've documented here could be the foundation for a class action lawsuit," she told him over lunch at a downtown restaurant. "The systematic denial patterns, the internal company documents you've uncovered through your research, it's compelling evidence of bad faith practices." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "You really think we can make them pay for what they did?" "I think we can make them pay for what they're doing to hundreds of families," Jennifer replied. "But I need to warn you, this won't be easy. They have teams of lawyers whose only job is to make cases like this go away. They'll try to settle quickly and quietly with non-disclosure agreements that prevent you from talking about their practices. That's not acceptable," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't about money. This is about stopping them from doing to other families what they did to mine." Jennifer smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. But you should know that once we file this lawsuit, your life is going to change dramatically. They'll investigate everything about you, your marriage, your military service, your finances. They'll look for any way to discredit you and your story." Marcus thought about Sarah, about the sleepless nights she had spent worrying about money while fighting for her life. He thought about the families reaching out to him through his blog, desperate for someone to help them navigate the system that seemed designed to fail them. "When do we start?" he asked. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning in federal court. By that afternoon, Marcus's phone was ringing nonstop with interview requests from journalists who had picked up the story. He gave several interviews, carefully explaining how the insurance company's practices had affected his family and hundreds of others. The response was immediate and overwhelming. His blog traffic spiked to thousands of visitors per day. Other lawyers contacted him about joining the case. Patient advocacy groups invited him to speak at conferences. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt like he had found a purpose worthy of her memory. He didn't yet realize that his newfound fame would make him a target, that the same passion and determination that made him an effective advocate would also paint him as a threat in the eyes of those who valued order over justice. The system he was challenging had ways of protecting itself that went far beyond courtroom tactics. The seeds of his future troubles were already being planted, but Marcus was too focused on his mission to notice the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday morning 8 months after Sarah's funeral. Marcus was in his home office, responding to emails from families across the country who had joined the class action lawsuit, when he heard vehicles pulling into his driveway. Through the window, he saw 2 black SUVs and a police cruiser. His military training kicked in immediately. Marcus saved his work, closed his laptop, and quickly gathered the most important documents from his desk. Years of deployment had taught him to always have an exit strategy, always be prepared for the unexpected. The doorbell rang twice, followed by heavy knocking. "Marcus Thompson, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Metropolitan Police Department. We need to speak with you." Marcus opened the door to find 3 law enforcement officers on his porch. Detective Rodriguez was a heavy-set man with tired eyes, flanked by a younger officer and a woman in a suit who didn't introduce herself. "Mr. Thompson, we've received some complaints about your activities," Detective Rodriguez said, his tone carefully neutral. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." "What kind of complaints?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "May we come in?" Marcus stepped aside, leading them to his living room. Sarah's picture smiled at them from the mantelpiece, surrounded by flowers that Marcus replaced every week. The woman in the suit, who still hadn't identified herself, took note of everything with sharp, calculating eyes. "Mr. Thompson, we understand you've been running some kind of online campaign against Consolidated Health Insurance," Detective Rodriguez began. We've received reports that you may be engaging in harassment of their employees. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I'm documenting their fraudulent practices and helping families who have been cheated by their system. That's not harassment. That's journalism. The younger officer spoke up. Sir, posting personal information about company executives online, encouraging people to contact them directly at their homes, that crosses a line. I've never posted anyone's personal information, Marcus replied firmly. Everything on my blog is public record or information that was provided to me voluntarily by affected families. The woman in the suit finally spoke. Mr. Thompson, I'm Agent Sarah Walsh with the Department of Homeland Security. She showed him a badge that made Marcus's blood run cold. We're concerned that your activities may be constituting domestic terrorism under federal law. The room went silent. Marcus stared at Agent Walsh, trying to process what he had just heard. Domestic terrorism? For helping sick people fight insurance denials? For organizing what amounts to a coordinated attack on a major corporation? Agent Walsh replied coolly. Your blog has over 50,000 followers. When you post about a specific insurance adjuster or company executive, that person receives hundreds of phone calls and emails. Some of those communications have contained threats. Marcus shook his head. I'm not responsible for what other people choose to do. I've never advocated for violence or threats. I've explicitly asked people to keep all communications professional and legal. But you understand how these things can escalate, Detective Rodriguez said, his tone more sympathetic now. Emotions run high when people are dealing with medical bills and dying family members. Sometimes they cross lines they wouldn't normally cross. So you want me to stop helping them? Agent Walsh leaned forward. We want you to consider the consequences of your actions. This lawsuit you filed has already cost Consolidated Health Insurance millions of dollars in legal fees and negative publicity. They're a major employer in this city, providing health coverage to hundreds of thousands of people. Disrupting their operations affects far more than just their profit margins. Marcus felt the rage building in his chest, the same anger that had kept him awake for months after Sarah's death. They disrupted my wife's treatment. They disrupted her final months of life. They're disrupting families every single day with their systematic denial of legitimate claims. We understand your frustration, Agent Walsh said, but the legal system is handling your grievances through proper channels. This public campaign you're running is creating chaos and potentially putting people at risk. What people? Marcus demanded. The insurance executives who make seven-figure salaries while denying cancer treatment to children? The adjusters who get bonuses for saving the company money by letting people die? Those are the people you're worried about. The younger officer's hand moved toward his belt, a subtle gesture that Marcus's trained eye caught immediately. He forced himself to take a deep breath, to lower his voice, and step back from the confrontation that was brewing. Gentlemen, Agent Walsh, Marcus said carefully, I appreciate your concerns, but I haven't broken any laws. I have a constitutional right to free speech, a right to petition for redress of grievances, and a right to organize peaceful protest. Everything I've done has been within those rights. Rights have limits, Mr. Thompson, Agent Walsh replied. And when the exercise of those rights begins to threaten public safety and economic stability, we have an obligation to intervene. After the officers left, Marcus immediately called Jennifer Chun, his lawyer. Her response was swift and unambiguous. They're trying to intimidate you, she said over the phone. This is a classic corporate response to a lawsuit that's gaining traction. They can't beat you in court with the evidence you've assembled, so they're trying to use law enforcement to shut you down. Can they do that? Can they really classify what I'm doing as terrorism? They can try, Jennifer said grimly. The domestic terrorism laws are deliberately vague, designed to give law enforcement broad, discretionary power. But you haven't committed any crimes, Marcus. You're exercising your constitutional rights. So what do? We be very, very careful. No more blog posts that mention specific employees by name. No more posting of company contact information. We stick to the facts, the court filings, and the public record. And you might want to consider hiring a criminal defense attorney as backup. That night, Marcus sat in his darkened living room, staring at Sarah's picture and trying to understand how fighting for justice had made him an enemy of the state. He thought about his 23 years in the military, his oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, apparently, he was the domestic enemy. He pulled out his laptop and began typing a new blog post. He couldn't name names anymore, couldn't provide the detailed contact information that had helped so many families reach the people responsible for their suffering. But he could still tell the truth. He could still document the patterns of abuse, still connect families with resources, still build the movement that would honor Sarah's memory. Marcus didn't realize that his every keystroke was now being monitored, that his phone calls were being recorded, that a team of investigators was building a case designed to silence him permanently. He was about to learn that the system he had served so faithfully had ways of protecting itself that went far beyond the rule of law. The war was just beginning, and Marcus Thompson was about to discover that sometimes the enemy wore a badge and claimed to serve the same country he had bled for on foreign battlefields. The memorial service was supposed to be simple. Marcus had planned it for the one-year anniversary of Sarah's death, just a small gathering at the cemetery where friends and family could share memories and honor her life. He had spent weeks organizing it, coordinating with the cemetery administration, arranging for flowers, and reaching out to Sarah's former students and colleagues. What he hadn't expected was the crowd. Word had spread through his blog and the network of families he had been helping. People drove from neighboring states to attend, carrying pictures of their own lost loved ones and stories of their battles with insurance companies. By the time Marcus arrived at the cemetery that morning, over 300 people had gathered around Sarah's grave. The scene was both beautiful and overwhelming. Flowers covered the headstone and spilled out across the grass. Children who had been Sarah's students held handmade signs thanking her for her kindness. Cancer survivors wore yellow ribbons and shared stories of how Sarah's blog and advocacy work had helped them navigate their own insurance battles. Marcus stood before the crowd, holding a folded piece of paper with remarks he had prepared. His voice cracked as he spoke about Sarah's compassion, her dedication to her students, and her fight against the disease that ultimately took her life. He talked about how her memory lived on in the families they were helping, in the changes they were forcing in the insurance industry, and in the community of supporters who refused to let corporate greed triumph over human decency. The crowd was respectful and quiet during his speech, but Marcus noticed the police presence at the edges of the cemetery. More officers than would be needed for simple crowd control, some of them carrying equipment that seemed excessive for a memorial service. His military experience made him acutely aware of tactical positioning, and what he saw made him uneasy. After the formal ceremony ended, people lingered to share their own stories and thank Marcus personally. A mother from Ohio described how Sarah's blog had helped her successfully appeal her son's denied leukemia treatment. A veteran from Texas talked about how the advocacy resources Marcus had compiled had helped him get coverage for his service-connected cancer. Each story reinforced Marcus's conviction that their work was making a real difference. Detective Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's side as the crowd began to thin. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk. Now, at my wife's memorial service. I'm sorry about the timing, but this can't wait." Rodriguez's expression was grim. "We've received credible intelligence about a potential threat against you." Marcus looked around at the families with children, the elderly cancer survivors, the teachers, and veterans who had come to honor Sarah's memory. A threat from whom? These people. Not from them. Against them. And against you. Rodriguez pulled Marcus aside, away from the remaining mourners. "There's been chatter online about disrupting this event, possibly targeting you personally. We're here for your protection." "What kind of chatter?" "The kind that suggests some people aren't happy with the attention your case is getting." "Look, Thompson, I know we've had our differences, but I'm trying to keep you safe here." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted near the cemetery entrance. A group of about 20 people had arrived, carrying signs and banners. At first, Marcus thought they were additional supporters, but as they got closer, he could read their messages: support American business, stop the fraud, and insurance creates jobs. The counter-protesters moved through the crowd, creating tension and confusion. Marcus recognized the tactics immediately. Professional agitators designed to provoke a response that could be used to justify police intervention. He had seen similar operations during his deployments, where military contractors would stage incidents to justify escalating security measures. "You need to disperse this gathering," Detective Rodriguez told Marcus urgently. "This situation is becoming unstable." Marcus looked at the families still visiting Sarah's grave, many of them elderly or dealing with serious illnesses themselves. These people aren't causing any trouble. They're mourning their loved ones and supporting each other. "But those counter-protesters are looking for a fight," Rodriguez replied. "If this turns violent, people could get hurt." As if on cue, one of the counter-protesters began shouting at an elderly woman whose grandson had died of brain cancer. "Your family is a bunch of liars. Insurance fraud is a crime." Marcus felt his military training kick in. Without thinking, he stepped between the agitator and the elderly woman, using his body to shield her from the verbal assault. "Back off. This is a memorial service, not a political rally." The counter-protester, a young man with aggressive body language and the build of someone who spent time in a gym, stepped closer to Marcus. "You're the fraud, Thompson. You're stealing money from honest companies and hurting working families." I said back off. Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones. The crowd around them went quiet, sensing the tension escalating. Instead of backing down, the counter-protester shoved Marcus hard in the chest. Marcus's reflexes, honed by years of military training and still sharp from months of stress and grief, responded automatically. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and forced him to the ground in a textbook defensive maneuver. The takedown lasted less than 3 seconds, but it was enough. Police officers who had been watching from a distance rushed forward, treating Marcus as the aggressor rather than someone defending himself and others. He released the counter-protester immediately and raised his hands, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Sir, you need to step back," one of the officers shouted, his hand moving to his weapon. "I was defending myself," Marcus replied calmly, his hands still raised. "That man assaulted me first." But the officers weren't listening. They saw a veteran who had been classified as a potential domestic terrorist subduing someone at a large gathering. Their training and recent briefings had prepared them for exactly this scenario, a dangerous individual using military tactics against civilians. "Get on the ground now," another officer commanded. Marcus complied, lying face down on the grass beside his wife's grave while officers surrounded him. The crowd of mourners watched in horror as police handcuffed the man who had been speaking about love and justice just minutes before. "This is insane," someone in the crowd shouted. He was protecting Mrs. Chun, but the police weren't interested in witness statements. They had their target, and they had what they considered justification for arrest. As they pulled Marcus to his feet, Detective Rodriguez approached with an expression that mixed sympathy with resignation. "Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for assault and battery, disturbing the peace, and inciting a riot." Marcus looked back at Sarah's grave as they led him away. The flowers he had carefully arranged that morning were trampled, and the peaceful memorial he had planned had become exactly the kind of chaos that would be used to justify further restrictions on his activities. He didn't know that the counter-protester who had shoved him was an off-duty police officer working for a private security firm hired by Consolidated Health Insurance. He didn't know that the entire confrontation had been carefully planned and choreographed to create exactly the outcome that was now unfolding. As the police car pulled away from the cemetery, Marcus caught a glimpse of Agent Walsh talking on her phone near the black SUVs that had become a regular presence in his life. Her expression suggested satisfaction with the day's events. The war against the insurance industry had just become a war against Marcus Thompson personally, and Sarah's memory, which he had tried so hard to honor, was about to become a weapon used against him. The courtroom was packed on the morning of Marcus Thompson's trial. What had started as a simple assault charge had exploded into a federal case involving terrorism allegations, First Amendment rights, and corporate influence over law enforcement. Jennifer Chun sat beside Marcus at the defendant's table, surrounded by boxes of evidence and legal documents that told the story of a grieving veteran's transformation into an enemy of the state. 6 months had passed since the arrest at Sarah's memorial service. Marcus had spent 3 weeks in jail before making bail, during which time his blog had been shut down and his assets frozen pending investigation. The families who had depended on his advocacy work were left without resources, their cases stalled while their medical bills continued to mount. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Assistant District Attorney Michael Barnes painted Marcus as a dangerous individual who had used his military training and online platform to organize what amounted to a domestic terrorist campaign against a legitimate business. They presented evidence of threatening phone calls received by insurance company employees, documented instances of harassment at executive homes, and testimony from mental health experts suggesting that Marcus's grief had evolved into dangerous obsession. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Barnes said during his opening statement, grief is understandable. Loss is part of the human experience. But when grief transforms into rage, when personal tragedy becomes an excuse for organized intimidation and violence, society has an obligation to respond. Marcus Thompson crossed that line when he turned his personal pain into a weapon against innocent people just trying to do their jobs. Jennifer Chin's defense strategy focused on the systematic corporate conspiracy to silence whistleblowing and the constitutional rights at stake. During her opening statement, she painted a picture of a man who had discovered widespread fraud and corruption, only to be targeted by the very system he was trying to reform. This case is not about assault, Chin told the jury. This case is about the right to speak truth to power, the right to organize peaceful protest, and the right to seek justice when the system fails you. Marcus Thompson committed no crime except the crime of being effective. He gave voice to thousands of families who had been cheated, ignored, and abandoned by a company that profits from human suffering. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Marcus took the stand to testify on his own behalf. Jennifer had advised against it, knowing that his military bearing and intensity might intimidate the jury. But Marcus insisted on telling his story in his own words. He spoke about Sarah with a voice that carried both love and pain. He described her final months, the desperate search for treatments, the crushing weight of medical bills, and the insurance company's systematic efforts to delay and deny coverage. The courtroom was silent as he read from Sarah's journal entries during her treatment, passages where she worried more about the family's finances than her own mortality. "My wife died fighting 2 battles," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the jury. "She fought cancer, and she fought consolidated health insurance. Cancer might have killed her body, but their greed killed her spirit. They turned her final months into a constant struggle for basic human dignity." Prosecutor Barnes's cross-examination was brutal. He forced Marcus to admit that he had encouraged families to contact insurance company executives directly. He played recordings of angry phone messages left by families who had found executive contact information through Marcus's network. He presented social media posts where followers of Marcus's blog had made threatening statements about insurance company employees. "Mr. Thompson, you say you never advocated violence," Barnes pressed. "But didn't you know that when you posted the names and contact information of insurance executives, some of your followers would go too far?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I knew that desperate families might call and demand answers. I knew that parents watching their children die might raise their voices when talking to the people denying their claims. But I never encouraged threats or violence. But you continued posting that information even after receiving reports of threatening behavior. I continued providing transparency about the people making life and death decisions for profit," Marcus replied firmly. "These executives hide behind corporate anonymity while families suffer. I made them visible and accountable." The most damaging testimony came from Agent Walsh, who presented evidence of Marcus's growing radicalization in the months leading up to his arrest. She showed the jury blog posts where his language had become increasingly confrontational, emails where he had discussed more aggressive tactics for pressuring the insurance company, and surveillance footage from the memorial service showing his military-style takedown of the counter-protester. Mr. Thompson's background as a trained soldier, combined with his demonstrated willingness to use physical force and his ability to organize large groups of emotionally volatile individuals, makes him a clear threat to public safety, Walsh testified. His activities meet the federal definition of domestic terrorism, the use of intimidation and fear to achieve political objectives. Jennifer Chin's rebuttal focused on the orchestrated nature of the confrontation at the memorial service. She presented evidence that the counter-protesters had been organized and funded by a private security firm with ties to Consolidated Health Insurance. She showed that the man who had shoved Marcus was an off-duty police officer who had been specifically instructed to provoke a physical confrontation. This entire case is the result of corporate manipulation of our justice system, Chin argued during her closing statement. A major corporation used its resources and influence to turn law enforcement against a citizen who was exercising his constitutional rights. They couldn't beat Marcus Thompson in the court of public opinion, so they used their money and connections to manufacture a criminal case against him. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, their verdict was mixed and reflected the complexity of the case. They found Marcus not guilty of the terrorism-related charges, but guilty of assault in the 3rd degree, a misdemeanor that acknowledged he had used excessive force while recognizing the provocation involved. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Marcus to 6 months of probation and community service, but her comment from the bench made clear her understanding of the larger issues at stake. Mr. Thompson, this court recognizes the legitimacy of your grievances and the importance of the advocacy work you are doing, Judge Williams said. However, the law requires that such advocacy remain within legal boundaries, even when those boundaries seem inadequate to address systemic injustices. I encourage you to continue your important work while being mindful of the responsibilities that come with leadership. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced a crowd of supporters and media representatives. The families he had helped were there, along with patient advocacy groups, civil liberties organizations, and other veterans who understood the battle he had been fighting. "This isn't over," Marcus told the crowd, his voice carrying the same determination that had sustained him through combat and grief. "They may have silenced my blog temporarily, but they can't silence the truth. They can't stop families from sharing their stories, and they can't prevent us from demanding accountability from companies that profit from human suffering." 6 months later, Marcus launched a new organization called Sarah's Shield, a patient advocacy group that provided legal resources and support for families fighting insurance denials. The organization was careful to operate within the legal boundaries established by his case, but it continued the work that had made him a target in the first place. The class action lawsuit against Consolidated Health Insurance eventually settled for $2.8 billion, with the company agreeing to reform its claims review processes and establish an independent oversight board. While the settlement included no admission of wrongdoing, it represented the largest insurance fraud settlement in history and provided compensation for thousands of affected families. Marcus never remarried, but he found purpose in his advocacy work and in the community of families who had been brought together by shared struggle. Every year on the anniversary of Sarah's death, he organized a memorial gathering that drew thousands of supporters. The event was always peaceful, always legal, and always effective at keeping the issues of medical care and insurance reform in the public eye. 10 years after Sarah's death, Marcus published a book about his experience called Fighting for Sarah. In it, he reflected on the lessons learned from his confrontation with corporate power and government authority. "I learned that the system protects itself," he wrote. "When you challenge powerful interests, they will use every tool at their disposal to silence you. But I also learned that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they unite around truth and justice." Sarah's fight became our fight, and our fight changed the system. Marcus Thompson never completely recovered from the loss of his wife, but he transformed his grief into a force for change that helped thousands of other families avoid the suffering that had defined his own experience. His story became a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in courtrooms, boardrooms, and the hearts of ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. The veteran who had been tossed at his wife's funeral had indeed made mistakes, but they were the mistakes of a man who loved too deeply and fought too hard for justice in a world that often rewards silence and submission. In the end, his greatest victory was not legal or financial, but the transformation of personal tragedy into collective action that honored his wife's memory while protecting other families from the same fate.